Hello and welcome to this video on production and productivity. If we consider our business normally has 4 separate departments in which its staff work. And in our AS studies, we're going to look at these 4 different departments. And the AS syllabus is split in 2. In Theme 1, you're looking at marketing and managing people, and in Theme 2, we're looking at finance and resource management. We've already done finance, and we're now going to be moving on to a separate area of the business, which is called resource management. Resource management contains 4 topics. We're going to start off by looking at production, productivity and efficiency, then move on to capacity utilization, stock control, and finally quality. So today's video, we're going to look at production and productivity. So our objectives are to look at 4 different ways in which a business might produce its products, be able to describe why a product may be produced using each one of those ways, some of the advantages and disadvantages, and then move on to looking at what is meant by productivity and what might influence the level of productivity in a business. So we're going to start with our main methods of organising production. But first of all, what do we mean by production? Well, production is the total number of units produced in a given period of time. Sometimes it's called output. For example, how many cars are produced in a year at a local car plant? Well, that number would be the production, the total number of units being produced. And there are 4 ways in which a business might choose to organise itself to produce its output. And those 4 we're going to look at in this video are job production, batch production, flow production, and cell production. So once you've taken down this definition, let's move on. Let's start off with job production. Getting a suit made by a tailor, or having a haircut done, or the construction of a football stadium would all be examples of job production. What do the approaches here have in common? Well, they're all one-off or a small number of items being produced. A tailored suit is a one-off, a haircut is a one-off, a football stadium is a one-off item that's being produced. They're normally made to customers' specifications. For example, a wedding cake or a building product, the customer will specify exactly what they want. And they're often undertaken by small specialist businesses. For example, architects or shipbuilders would be involved in job production. They do one-off projects and they focus just on that particular item. If we review some of the advantages and disadvantages of this approach, well, some of the advantages is that customer requirements and any changes can be handled quite easily. There's just one item to adjust, and as a result, often they can be of high quality. We have very highly skilled staff, and so a high quality product. On the flip side, disadvantages. Well, the cost of one of these units tend to be quite high. You can't mass produce them. Often they are quite labour intensive. They involve people, and so they are quite costly, and it requires close consultation with the client. This hasn't been done before in many circumstances, so they have to relay information and make sure they discuss it with their customer to get a good result. The next form of production is called batch production. World Cup footballs all made at the same time would be an example of batch production. Delicious buns baked in an oven would be an example of batch production. Cricket bats would be an example of batch production. What do these have in common in the ways in which they are processed or produced? They are similar items that are produced together in, surprisingly, batches, in groups. So each group goes through one stage of the production process before moving on to the next stage. So for example, this group of bats here, the 50 bats, they are all cut together, and then they go through together to the next stage where the handles are fitted to the splice and they're attached, and then they'll go through together to the next stage, have the rubber grips attached, through to the next stage, the stickers, and so on. Well, why would you organise production like this? Well, you can apply your workforce at each stage of the production process to concentrate their skills. You also may achieve better use of equipment and so produce good quality products more economically than manufacturing them individually. It may be a better use of equipment to do several buns in a row in one oven than each time you want to make a bun, doing it individually in the oven. So what are the advantages of this approach? Well, you're going to save more costs than using job production because you can buy some in bulk. You can use specialist staff to work on the products at different stages of production. Some disadvantages though, you do need to require some stocks of raw materials to make sure you can process each batch. It may take time to switch production from one batch to another batch as well. Once you've got down some of the disadvantages and the advantages, let's move on to the next one. Our next example of a production process is flow production. The Model T Ford, made by Henry Ford, was one of the first examples of this, where the cars flowed through the plant, and as they moved through the plant, bits were added, and so on. Increasingly, flow production is used to produce many items using technology. A good example would be bottles of Coca-Cola. The water flows into the plant and constantly flows all the way through the carbonator, and then there's fillers, and then they go through the bottling plant, and eventually they're ready for distribution. The process doesn't stop, and each individual item flows through constantly. This would be an example of flow production. What do they have in common? The product moves continuously through the production process. When one task is finished, the next task starts immediately, and so the time taken on each task must be roughly similar, so there's no bottlenecks in the flow. Let's have a look at some advantages and disadvantages. One of the main advantages is the cost per unit of production is reduced. It's also suitable for manufacture of large quantities. Often it uses technology, and so it can work perhaps more constantly than a workforce, and may need not as many staff to be trained or to operate it. Some disadvantages: well, setting up a plant like Coca-Cola's will take a long time and involves high quality machinery. If the flow stops at any moment, or if the production is halted, then production stops and no more goods are produced. Again, once you've got down some of the advantages and disadvantages, let's move on to our last one. Cell production is a form of flow production where the work is organised into teams. Teams are given responsibility for doing a part of the production process as the product moves by along the assembly line. So each little cell of staff are posted at each stage, and as the product moves through the assembly line, the team come and they do what they have to do to get them through that stage of production, and then the good moves on to the next stage. This often leads to improved productivity because the teams are quite motivated rather than working by yourself, and also you can develop specialised skills, which means you become more productive, better at your job. So we've looked at the different methods of production, but which is the best for a growing firm? Now many people might assume that flow production is the best for a large firm, but it depends on a number of factors. Does the customer demand options on the product? If they do, then maybe job production would be better than flow production because you can easily adjust to your customer's demands. Are there technological limitations? Can production be automated? Or perhaps if it can't be, then you have to rely on individual workers, and maybe batch or job would be more appropriate. A big one for growing firms is, do they have the finances in place or the amount of people to be able to create a flow production line? And lastly, standards. What quality is required? If it's a very high quality item, that might change the form of production, whereas if quality is not as important, then maybe you might go for a different one. So we've looked at the 4 different methods of production, and we've looked at why a product may be produced using each method. Now we're going to move on to productivity. Productivity measures the relationship between inputs in the production process, what goes in, the raw materials, and the resultant outputs, what comes out at the end, the finished goods or services. So again, once we've taken this definition down, we'll move on to some examples. So examples might be the output per worker, the input being the worker and the output being the number of goods, or the output per day, or hour, or week, or the output per machine, or another example might be unit cost. We're going to focus on labour productivity in this section. Labour productivity measures the output per worker, and a formula we need to know that calculate labour productivity is we can measure the output per worker by taking the output, or the production, the number of units in total, and divide it by the number of workers. So for example, if total output is 100,000 and there are 2,000 workers, what is labour productivity? What is the output per worker? How much is each worker producing on average? If you want to pause the video, have a quick go over the calculation, and then see if you get it right. Well, labour productivity in this example will be 100,000 units divided by the 2,000 workers, so 50 units per worker. So labour productivity here would be 50 units per worker, the output per worker. How might a business go about improving productivity? Well, there are a number of different ways. Firstly, training. Trained staff will be able to produce more, so the output per worker should increase. If the staff are more motivated, they'll produce more, divided by the number of workers, again, in productivity would be increased. If there are more machines, then maybe workers can use their time more effectively, produce more, so the output per worker would increase. If the machines are better quality, more accurate or less wasteful, then the output should increase and the output per worker would increase. Better quality raw materials maybe limits the number of rejected products or the number of products that aren't good quality and don't meet their criteria. Then again, the actual output should increase, divided by the number of workers, productivity should increase. The last one was maybe if staff are organised in a better way. If their opinions are sought, if they work in teams, then they may feel more motivated, and as a result, they may improve the output per worker. There are often a number of difficulties, though, in trying to get your workforce to be more productive. Pushing them a bit harder, trying to motivate them, may negatively affect on quality. They're trying to create more in their day, and so they're not as good a quality, and so customers are less satisfied and your reputation is damaged. Or perhaps the workers may feel that they're being exploited or having to work harder for the same pay. They may get stressed and demotivated, and so your plan may backfire. So there can be some difficulties in increasing labour productivity. So we've looked at the 4 different methods of production. We've looked at the advantages and disadvantages of each one, and then looked at labour productivity, in particular labour productivity, and the factors that influence it. That's all.